Jake Thompson started his day early, as always, his well-worn delivery van purring along as he made his way through the narrow city streets. This was his comfort zone, following his schedule, working without interruptions, keeping to himself. But today, that rhythm was shattered when his manager, Richard, handed him a small, heavy package marked "Confidential" in bold red letters. "Look, Jake," Richard said, his tone unusually tense, "this one's going straight to City Hall, the mayor's office, and they want it there within the hour. Don't mess this up." Jake nodded, unfazed. "I got it, Rich. It'll be there before they expect it." Richard gave him a lingering, doubtful look, as if he were evaluating whether Jake was truly capable. "See that it is? The last thing we need is a screw-up with someone this important." With a sigh, Jake climbed into the van, adjusting his rearview mirror. He couldn't deny feeling a twinge of pride. It wasn't every day he was trusted with something confidential for a city official. He figured this delivery might even boost his standing at work. Little did he know, this so-called privilege would soon become his nightmare. As he approached the barricaded security zone, Jake was immediately flagged down by a police cruiser parked in the middle of the road. He slowed, instinctively reaching for his ID, thinking they'd probably just check his credentials and let him pass. But as he rolled down his window, one of the officers, a bulky, stern-faced man with a sneer, motioned for him to get out. "Step out of the vehicle, sir. Now." Jake hesitated, glancing at the officer in confusion. Sure, officer? But is there a problem? I'm on a schedule here." "Out! Now." The officer barked, his expression hardened. Swallowing his irritation, Jake climbed out of the van, feeling a chill run down his spine. The officer wasted no time grabbing him by the arm, roughly steering him away from the vehicle. Two other officers joined, their faces equally serious, and within seconds, they were tearing through his van, tossing around his belongings like trash. "Hey, careful with that," Jake protested, watching in horror as one officer yanked open his glove compartment, spilling its contents onto the floor. "I'm just a delivery driver." "Save it," the bulky officer snapped, flashing Jake a mocking grin. "We've seen plenty of just delivery drivers before. What's in the package, huh?" I don't know," Jake stammered, feeling his face flush as a small crowd began to gather nearby. "I'm just doing my job. It's confidential. I wasn't told what's inside." "Confidential?" the officer repeated, chuckling as he eyed his colleagues. "Oh, hear that, boys? He says it's confidential." Jake's heart pounded as they pulled the package out of the back, holding it up like a trophy. He had no idea what was inside, but he knew it couldn't possibly be worth this much fuss. The officers exchanged knowing looks, the mocking grin never leaving the lead officer's face. "So you're telling us," he said slowly, "that you're delivering a sealed, confidential package to the mayor's office, and you don't know what's in it?" Jake swallowed hard, willing himself to stay calm. "That's right. I'm just a driver, okay? It's my job to deliver it. Just a driver." The officer's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, just a driver. We're going to take a little look inside." Before Jake could respond, the officer slid a knife under the edge of the package seal and sliced it open. Jake felt his stomach twist as the officer rummaged through, pulling out several thick, sealed envelopes marked with official government seals. The cop's smug expression faded, replaced by confusion and then alarm as he stared at the documents. One of the other officers nudged him. "That looks official. You think it's real?" "Oh, it's real," the lead officer muttered, and his face reddened as he realized the mistake. He quickly closed the package, his eyes flicking to Jake with something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Well, looks like you're free to go." "Free to go?" Jake echoed, feeling a wave of humiliation and anger wash over him. "You trashed my van, treated me like some kind of criminal, and now I'm just free to go? What the hell was that about?" The officer's face tightened, but he held his ground. "Sir, this was a standard procedure. You were in a restricted area with a suspicious package. Next time, don't be so touchy." "Touchy?" Jake's voice rose, and he glanced around at the crowd that had gathered, feeling his cheeks burning. "You humiliated me in front of all these people. I didn't do anything wrong." The lead officer stepped closer, towering over Jake with a look that silenced him instantly. "Listen, pal, consider yourself lucky. You were delivering confidential government material in a high-security zone. Maybe next time think twice about what kind of work you're getting involved in." Jake clenched his fists, his whole body tense with frustration and shame. He wanted to yell, to demand an apology, to do something to make them see he wasn't the fool they seemed to think he was. But before he could find the words, the officers were already walking away, muttering to each other, leaving him standing there, angry, humiliated, and utterly alone. As he climbed back into his van, trying to gather his thoughts, a shadow passed over his window. He looked up to see a young woman, one of the onlookers, shaking her head with a mix of pity and disbelief. "Guess nobody's safe from them these days." "Huh," she murmured, offering him a small, sympathetic smile before disappearing into the crowd. Jake let out a heavy sigh, gripping the wheel as he tried to steady himself. This was supposed to have been an ordinary delivery. Instead, he felt like a pawn, his day thrown into chaos. He didn't know what was inside that package or why it mattered so much. But one thing was clear. Whoever was in charge had put him right in the crossfire. The mayor's office was grander than Jake expected, with polished marble floors and ornate columns towering around him. A receptionist had asked him to wait, barely looking up as she directed him to a seat by a large, intimidating double door that led to the mayor's personal office. Jake's leg bounced nervously. He still couldn't believe he'd actually been called here. Just yesterday, he was only a delivery driver, being humiliated on the street by police. Now he was supposed to sit face-to-face with one of the most powerful people in the city. Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of it all, replaying the events in his mind like a broken film reel. His van, the police's accusations, the package that still held its mysteries. It was all he could do to hold his frustration in check. "Mr. Thompson?" The receptionist finally looked up, motioning him toward the door. "The mayor will see you now." Jake stood, wiping his palms on his jeans as he entered the spacious office. Behind an oversized mahogany desk sat Mayor Charles Whitley, his crisp suit and meticulously combed hair making him every bit the image of a city leader. The mayor looked up with a smooth, practiced smile, though his eyes seemed to hold something more scrutinizing. "Jake Thompson," he said, gesturing to a leather chair in front of his desk. "Please take a seat." Jake nodded, sinking into the chair with an uncomfortable stiffness, feeling more like he was on trial than at a casual meeting. Mayor Whitley cleared his throat, leaning back as he folded his hands on the desk. "First off, Mr. Thompson, let me personally apologize for the way you were treated yesterday. What happened was regrettable." Jake didn't know how to respond. The whole apology felt staged, like it was more about covering political bases than genuine remorse. "Right," Jake finally said, his voice laced with bitterness. "Because getting thrown out of my van and searched on the street like a criminal is regrettable." The mayor's smile tightened ever so slightly. "Understandable reaction," he replied, his tone smooth but clipped. "And I'm sure it didn't feel fair. But as you know, security procedures are in place for a reason, and they have to be followed, especially in high-risk zones. I'm sure you understand." Jake clenched his jaw. "I understand that your security guys treated me like I was guilty before I'd even done anything." A slight silence hung between them. The mayor straightened his tie, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Look, Jake, I appreciate that you're upset, but I called you here because I value integrity. Your actions yesterday, keeping to your task, cooperating even under pressure, showed me that you're exactly the kind of person we need." Jake blinked, not sure he'd heard right. "Excuse me? What are you saying?" "What I'm saying is," the mayor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "how would you feel about a new position, a promotion of sorts? We're looking for someone trustworthy to handle sensitive deliveries on behalf of my office." Jake stared at him, speechless. He'd expected apologies, maybe even compensation, but this? An actual job offer? He glanced down, the memories of the humiliation still fresh and bitter. "You're offering me a job?" Jake asked, unable to mask his skepticism. "After what happened?" "Think of it as a way of making amends," the mayor replied smoothly. "But also, it's because I genuinely believe you can be an asset to us. Not everyone can handle pressure the way you did." Jake shifted in his seat, absorbing this. He didn't trust the mayor entirely. Something about his words felt practiced, almost too perfect. And yet, a small part of him couldn't ignore the chance to step up, to prove himself in a way he hadn't been able to as a simple delivery driver. He felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: ambition. What would this job involve exactly? He asked cautiously. The mayor's smile widened, seeing Jake's interest. It's simple. You'd be responsible for delivering important documents and packages to various city officials. Things we can't send through regular channels. I need someone who can keep quiet, stay professional, and, above all, be discreet. Jake narrowed his eyes. So, you want me to carry sensitive documents because I'm good at keeping my mouth shut? In so many words, yes, the mayor replied without missing a beat. You seem like someone who values hard work and loyalty. Am I wrong? Jake hesitated, his mind a storm of doubts and questions. Was this a genuine opportunity, or was he being drawn into something he didn't fully understand? But before he could dwell too long, the mayor leaned in, his voice dropping lower. This could mean more than just a paycheck, Jake. It's a chance for something stable, secure, a real future. Isn't that what you want? Jake swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. A real future. It was more than he'd dared to hope for in years. And the pay had to be better than what he was making now. He forced himself to hold the mayor's gaze, to search for any hint of deception. But Whitley's expression remained steady, unwavering. Fine, Jake said slowly, his voice rough with uncertainty. I'll do it, but I have one condition. The mayor arched an eyebrow. Oh. Jake leaned forward, his tone hard. I want your word that what happened yesterday won't happen again. No more humiliations. No more treating me like a criminal. Mayor Whitley's smile returned, polished and confident. Agreed, Mr. Thompson. I can assure you, as long as you're working with us, you'll be treated with the utmost respect. They shook hands, the mayor's grip firm and authoritative. Jake felt a strange sense of accomplishment, but he also knew he was walking into something far more complex than he understood. Jake's first day on the job as the mayor's trusted courier felt surreal. He'd swapped his usual van for a sleek, black sedan provided by the mayor's office, and the sight of his crisp ID badge clipped to his shirt made him feel like he was stepping into an entirely different world. But beneath the professional veneer, he felt a growing sense of unease. There was something about the mayor's polished smile and too smooth apologies that didn't sit right. Still, he reminded himself that this was a rare opportunity to move up in the world. The morning started with a set of straightforward instructions. Pick up a package from a nearby law firm and deliver it to a city council office. The task seemed simple enough, yet Jake noticed the label was again marked confidential. He traced his finger over the word, feeling a flicker of doubt as he remembered the fiasco with the police. But he pushed those thoughts away, determined to make a clean start. Jake arrived at the law firm, expecting a standard handoff. Instead, he was met by a severe-looking woman named Ms. Holloway, who eyed him critically before handing him a thick envelope. So, you're the new delivery guy? She asked, her tone bordering on contemptuous. Courier, Jake corrected, holding her gaze. He wasn't going to let himself be talked down to, especially not after all he'd been through. Ms. Holloway raised an eyebrow, but handed over the envelope without further comment. Well, be careful with that. It's worth more than you know. What's in it? Jake asked, half expecting her to ignore him. But curiosity had already taken hold. Her eyes flickered, a faint smirk on her lips. Let's just say it's the kind of information people will pay a lot to keep secret. Jake nodded, clutching the envelope a bit tighter. He was well aware that this wasn't an ordinary delivery job, but Holloway's words added a new weight to his mission. On the way to his car, he caught himself glancing over his shoulder, feeling a strange sense of being watched. He shook it off, pushing himself to focus. The mayor trusted him. He had to make good on that trust. Arriving at the council office, Jake checked in with the receptionist, a young woman who glanced at his ID and, almost imperceptibly, lowered her voice. You're Mr. Thompson, right? From the mayor's office? Jake gave a curt nod. That's right. Take it up to room 204. And be careful who you talk to here. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she kept glancing around, as if expecting someone to listen in. Jake frowned, his unease intensifying. Who would I talk to? I'm just dropping this off. She hesitated, her eyes darkening. You'd be surprised. Just watch yourself, Mr. Thompson. With that cryptic warning, she motioned him toward the elevator, leaving him to digest her words. The elevator ride up felt like an eternity, and with each passing second, his mind raced, trying to make sense of the secrecy and veiled warnings. But just as he reached room 204 and raised his hand to knock, the door swung open, and he was greeted by a middle-aged man with a sharp, analytical gaze. You must be the mayor's new guy, the man said, eyeing Jake up and down as if sizing him up. I'm Deputy Councilman Barrett. Come in. Jake entered the office, taking in the high shelves stacked with legal books and the dim lighting. Barrett motioned for Jake to sit, which surprised him. He'd expected to just drop off the package and leave. He obeyed, feeling the weight of Barrett's intense scrutiny. You know, Barrett began, tapping his fingers together thoughtfully. It's not every day that the mayor sends a hand-delivered message with a trusted courier. Jake forced himself to stay calm. I'm just here to do my job, sir. Barrett leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Do you even know what that job really is, Thompson? Jake's pulse quickened, but he tried to keep his tone neutral. Delivering messages for the mayor, as far as I know. Barrett chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. Sure, but has he mentioned why he needs this delivered by hand? When Jake didn't answer, Barrett's gaze sharpened, and he nodded as if Jake's silence had confirmed something. You're just the errand boy, Barrett continued, his tone both dismissive and probing. The mayor must really be keeping you in the dark. Let me give you a little advice. Thompson, keep your eyes open. People in this office don't move documents like these for small reasons. Jake frowned, uncomfortable but curious. Are you saying something's wrong? Barrett shook his head, a slight smirk playing at his lips. Nothing's wrong if you don't ask questions. Just remember, the more you know, the more you have to lose. With that, Barrett took the envelope and leaned back in his chair, dismissing Jake with a slight nod. Jake rose, fighting the urge to question the man further, but he sensed any additional questions would only invite trouble. He exited the room, feeling as though he were leaving with more questions than answers. As he walked back to the elevator, the receptionist's words echoed in his head. Be careful who you talk to. And now, Barrett's cryptic warning, hinting that there was more to these deliveries than met the eye. Jake's initial excitement about his new role was swiftly fading, replaced by a creeping suspicion that he was in way over his head. Back in the car, he sat gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly out the windshield. The mayor had given him a job that supposedly required discretion and integrity, but nobody had mentioned he'd be surrounded by such hostility, secrecy, and threats. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from the mayor's assistant. Return to the office for another delivery. Jake let out a long sigh, mentally bracing himself for whatever else lay ahead. He was beginning to realize that in this new world, he was just a pawn. But pawns, he reminded himself, were often the first to learn the truth, whether they wanted to or not. Jake returned to the mayor's office, a weight settling on him that he couldn't shake. He'd barely processed the strange encounter with Barrett when the mayor's assistant, Mary Ann, handed him another package. This one thicker and sealed with even more prominent confidential stamps. She met his eyes with a look that was half pity, half warning. You need to be careful, Jake, she murmured as she passed him the package, her voice low so others couldn't hear. There are eyes on you? Eyes, he repeated, trying to sound casual despite the chill running down his spine. What's that supposed to mean? Mary Ann hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The halls of City Hall were as polished as they were intimidating, and in the distance, Jake saw two men in suits watching them. They looked away the moment he noticed them. Look, Jake, Mary Ann whispered, leaning in, this job isn't what it seems. You're being watched, evaluated, tested, really. And not just by the mayor. Jake's brow furrowed. Tested for what? She opened her mouth to answer, then hesitated, biting her lip. I've said too much already. Just keep your head down, okay? And with that, she turned and walked briskly down the hallway, leaving Jake standing there, the package heavy in his hand. He couldn't shake the feeling that each step he took was leading him deeper into something sinister. His instructions led him to a government building on the other side of town. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were a setting for a clandestine meeting. When Jake entered the reception area, a guard looked up, barely acknowledging him before directing him down a hallway. It led to a closed door labeled Private Meeting Room. Jake knocked, half expecting another hostile encounter. But this time, a woman in her 50s with neatly styled gray hair opened the door. She introduced herself as Ms. Sullivan, the mayor's legal advisor. "Come in," she said, her voice cool and controlled. Inside the room, a few other officials sat around a large table, some with skeptical expressions, others with forced politeness. Sullivan gestured for him to sit, but Jake remained standing, his unease growing. "You're the mayor's trusted courier?" she asked, eyeing him with something like disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, gripping the package tighter. She raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with skepticism. "And yet you don't look the part." "Interesting." Jake stiffened. He was used to the occasional jab about his appearance. He wasn't one of the slick, polished types who usually worked in City Hall. But here, in this world of calculated smiles and quiet hostility, the judgment felt sharper. "Appearance aside," he said, carefully keeping his tone neutral, "I was hired to do a job. You want the package or not?" The faintest smirk crossed Sullivan's face, and she exchanged a look with another man seated at the table. "Direct. I like that." She reached for the package, but just before she took it, she paused, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Jake," she said, her voice low and almost conspiratorial. "Do you know what you're carrying?" Jake tensed, the tension in the room thickening. "Confidential government documents," he replied, sticking to the line he'd been told. "Confidential, yes." She leaned back, her gaze unwavering. "But perhaps you haven't realized just how sensitive this information is." He forced himself to keep a neutral expression, though his heart pounded. He hadn't thought much about the contents, focusing instead on doing his job without question. But everyone he met seemed bent on making him doubt, on hinting that he was in way over his head. "I don't ask questions," Jake said, his voice steady. "I deliver. That's it." Sullivan regarded him for a long moment, then finally nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Good. That's precisely why you're here, and why you're being trusted with these deliveries. Remember, discretion is everything. You're carrying not only documents, but the trust of this city's leadership." She finally took the package, her gaze lingering on him for a beat longer. "And a word of advice. Do your job, keep quiet, and stay out of trouble. That's how you stay useful." The words stung, not because they were sharp, but because they were so dismissive. He was beginning to see how they viewed him, not as a person, but as a tool, something to be used and discarded when no longer needed. He left the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. In the hallway, he found himself alone, the only sounds the distant echoes of footsteps and the dull hum of fluorescent lights. He stared down the long, empty corridor, feeling trapped between duty and a creeping suspicion that something darker was at play. As he made his way back to the car, he caught sight of the same two men in suits from earlier, lingering by the exit. They exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable, and then one of them gave him a slow, condescending nod. Frustration simmered within Jake as he drove away from the government building. He couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being used, not just by the mayor, but by this entire web of officials, each with their own agendas and secrets. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. The job was supposed to be simple, yet everyone he met seemed to suggest that he was playing a part in something bigger than he'd realized. By the time he returned to City Hall, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city. Marianne was waiting for him by the entrance, her face tight with worry. "You did well today, Jake," she said quietly. "But I'd be careful if I were you." Jake shot her a weary look. Careful of what? The mayor? Ms. Sullivan? Or those two watchdogs in suits? Marianne hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. "All of them. You're valuable to the mayor, but that also makes you a threat to others. And in this line of work, threats don't stay standing for long." Jake's hands clenched involuntarily. "Why won't anyone just tell me what's really going on?" "Because you're not supposed to know," she said softly. "The less you know, the safer you are." Her words hung in the air, an ominous warning that only intensified his growing resentment. He felt like a pawn, a piece on a chessboard he barely understood. He didn't know what the endgame was, but he was certain of one thing. Whatever secrets these people were hiding, he was caught in the middle, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep playing along. Jake's drive back to City Hall was silent, but his mind raced with everything he'd seen and heard. The warnings, the suspicious looks, the guarded phrases, it all pointed to one thing. He was in the middle of a game he barely understood. He had half a mind to confront the mayor, demand answers. But when he parked, Mary Ann was waiting at the entrance, her expression a mix of worry and resignation. "Jake, the mayor wants to see you right away," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jake clenched his fists, feeling the weight of this moment. "Fine," he muttered, brushing past her. Inside the mayor's office, Mayor Whitley sat behind his desk, his gaze sharp, as if sizing Jake up for the first time. He motioned for Jake to sit, and though Jake hesitated, he finally dropped into the chair, folding his arms. "You've done good work, Jake," the mayor began, a measured calm in his voice. "I know this job hasn't been typical, but I wanted you to know you've made a difference. A lot of people wouldn't have had your patience." Jake's jaw tightened. "Let's skip the flattery, Mayor. What's really going on? I've been pulled aside, warned, and talked down to by nearly everyone. And I've had enough. Either you explain what I'm mixed up in, or I'm done." The mayor's lips pressed into a thin line. He let out a sigh, standing up to pace by the window, his back to Jake. "I didn't want you to have to know, Jake. Sometimes the less you know, the better." Jake stood up, his voice low but firm. "Well, now I want to know." The mayor glanced back at him, his gaze piercing. After a pause, he nodded, as if reaching a decision. "Very well. You've proven loyal, and I suppose you deserve the truth." He returned to his desk, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The packages you've been delivering, they're part of a delicate operation. I'm working to expose corruption within my administration." Jake stared, unblinking. "Corruption?" "Yes," the mayor replied, his tone somber. "High-ranking officials, city council members, they've been skimming funds, laundering through government projects. It goes all the way to our police department. They're siphoning off taxpayer money, and I've been gathering evidence. The documents you delivered were pieces of that puzzle, bits of information I needed to connect everything." Jake took this in, his stomach sinking. All the secrecy, the warnings, they were starting to make sense. "So, all this, it's because you don't know who's trustworthy?" "Exactly. You've seen how deep this runs. Some of the people you've met, Sullivan, Barrett, they're all part of it, working with me, testing you. They needed to be sure you wouldn't be compromised." Jake's fists tightened. "And what if I had been? What if I'd asked too many questions or didn't go along with it?" The mayor's face was unreadable. "Then you wouldn't be here right now." The threat lingered in the air, chilling Jake. He wanted to be angry, to demand how the mayor could put him in such a position without a single warning, but he realized that he'd chosen to stay in the dark just as much as the mayor had kept him there. "Look, Jake," the mayor continued, his tone softening, "I'm sorry you were pulled into this. But if this corruption is exposed, this city can finally be free of the people who've been bleeding it dry. You've helped more than you realize." Jake shook his head slowly. "So, that's it? I'm just supposed to walk away and pretend none of this happened?" The mayor's expression hardened, but there was a hint of respect in his eyes. "No, I need you for one last delivery." Jake raised an eyebrow, but the mayor handed him a single envelope, thinner than the others, with no confidential stamp. It bore only an address, a quiet, residential neighborhood on the city's outskirts. "Take this to the address. It'll be the last package," the mayor said. With a mixture of relief and suspicion, Jake took the envelope, leaving City Hall with a sense of finality. He drove to the address in silence, feeling like he was finally closing a chapter he'd never intended to open. When he reached the house, he found a modest, unassuming building. He knocked, and a middle-aged woman answered, looking at him with a hint of recognition. "Are you Jake Thompson?" she asked. "Yes, I have a delivery for you." The woman took the envelope, opening it with a calm that unnerved him. She glanced over the papers inside, her eyes softening. Finally, she looked up, a slight smile on her face. "Thank you, Jake," she said. "Because of this, my husband's name, can finally be cleared. Confused, Jake stammered, "Cleared of what?" She sighed, holding the papers to her chest. "My husband was a whistleblower. Years ago, he tried to reveal the corruption in City Hall, but they framed him, destroyed his reputation. He lost everything, but the mayor promised he'd make it right someday. I guess he finally kept his word." Jake felt the weight of the woman's words settle over him. The mayor had used him, yes, but he'd used him to set things right, to bring closure to people who had been wronged by a broken system. In a strange way, it gave Jake the sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd done something that mattered. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the mayor. "The corruption has been exposed. City Hall will be under review, and certain officials are being held accountable. Thank you for your part in this, Jake. You made a difference." Jake leaned against his car, feeling a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. He'd been thrown into a web of secrets and deceit, yes, but in the end, he'd helped bring justice. And that meant something to him. More than any promotion, more than any paycheck. Starting his engine, he looked back at the house one last time. For the first time in weeks, he felt a lightness he hadn't known he was missing. He was just a delivery driver again, but he was also someone who'd done his part to make things right. As he pulled away, he realized he'd carry the weight of these secrets forever. But he also knew one thing for sure. No matter how deep the shadows in the city, there were still people willing to fight for the truth. And, somehow, he'd become one of them.